Chapter 1601. How is it? Hearing the news of your daughter's death, do you feel sad, devastated? Tontian Black Tortoise looked at Gahan expectantly, hoping to see a sad expression on Gahan's face. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I was quite sad before, but after listening to your explanation, I'm not so sad anymore. Gahan stood up from the ground with a slight smile, looked at Tontian Black Tortoise, and said, "If I understand correctly, you are still my daughter, but you have completely integrated with Tontian. But your body is my Guhan's daughter. This is a fact that can never be changed. Even if the world is destroyed, you are still my Guhan's daughter. You are my Guxuanwu, my daughter." You, Tontian Black Tortoise paused. After hearing Gahan's words, he, who was originally very happy, suddenly became a little angry. He originally hoped to let Gahan experience the feeling of heartbreak, but he didn't expect Gahan to see it so clearly. But at the same time, Tontian Black Tortoise felt a little happy in his heart. Great, my father is willing to admit that I am his daughter. Great. I am still father's daughter. Father does not hate me. This kind of thinking obviously came from Goo Black Tortoise's personality. These two thoughts kept alternating in Tontian Black Tortoise's heart, giving Tontian Black Tortoise a splitting headache. But in the end, Tontian Black Tortoise's personality prevailed. After all, Tontian Black Tortoise had lived for tens of millions of years, and the accumulation of his personality was far more than a shallow Goo Black Tortoise. So naturally, he could easily suppress the part of Goo Black Tortoise's personality to the deepest part of the new personality, which was the position of the subconscious. Forget it. What you said is true, and you are indeed my father. This can't be changed. But so what? Mother is going to die soon, and you will die with her. But don't worry, father. Every Qingming festival, your daughter will pour a pot of good wine on your grave and light a thin incense stick to accompany you. Black Tortoise Tontian said with a smile. At the same time, he raised the contract with Guhan's signature. My dear daughter, there's something I don't understand. This contract doesn't just have my and your mother's names on it. Your name is also written on it. Don't tell me you won't die with us? Guhan asked curiously. You should know that as long as you are my daughter, then the Black Tortoise on the contract is you. Whether you change your name to Black Tortoise Tontian or Tontian Black Tortoise, it is useless. Don't worry about this, father. If I didn't have complete confidence, I would never sign this contract. Black Tortoise Tontian smiled proudly. Or should I say, your daughter is looking forward to dying with you. Lord Father, I've been looking forward to this day all the time. What do you mean? Guhan's expression suddenly became extremely deep. Do you even need to ask? As long as your daughter dies, Tontian Black Tortoise will become the prime of Tontian again, and this damned identity of your daughter will no longer exist. I'm afraid this will be the last time your daughter will call you father. After you die, you will no longer have a daughter. Ha ha. Tontian Black Tortoise Tontian started laughing hysterically, while Guhan seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. He quietly sat back in his chair and released Artoria from his dimensional pocket. Guhan gently caressed Artoria's pale face. Right now, Artoria's heart was convulsing, and her skin was rapidly disintegrating as if she had a malignant tumor, turning into puddles of black liquid. Artoria was indeed dying at an alarming rate. Gahan was unwilling to see Artoria lose her life just like that. He immediately mobilized all his nanomachines and prepared to resurrect Artoria using the method of Lucifer's resurrection. But Gahan failed. The nanomachines and consciousness fragment resurrection method that had always worked well in the past had all failed at this moment. Gahan was horrified to find that he could not recreate Artoria's physical cells. Or rather, every time Gahan created a physical cell, it would turn back into pus the next second. Only then did Gahan realize that this death was a death based on the rules, a death from the source of existence, and not a simple physical death. Therefore, this was not a death that could be resurrected by creating a physical body. Just like that, Gahan could only watch as Artoria's body gradually melted, starting from her hands and feet. Finally, only her head was left in Gahan's hand. At this moment, Artoria finally woke up from her deep sleep. She slowly opened her eyes. Before this, Artoria's eyes were filled with confusion when she looked at Gahan. She did not know who Gahan was, and she had completely lost all of Gahan's memories. But this time, when she opened her eyes, Gahan once again saw the familiar emotions in Artoria's eyes. She saw the deep love for herself, full of awkwardness and pain. At this moment, Gahan understood that Artoria had successfully recovered her memories. She had remembered everything she had forgotten in the seamless corridor and had returned to the real Artoria. But it was too late. It was too late. Artoria had just recovered her memories, and the last remaining part of her head began to liquefy. In the end, there was nothing left in Gahan's arms, only a puddle of stinky black water that proved that Artoria had once existed. She's finally dead. Seeing Artoria's death, Heaven-span Black Tortoise let out a joyful sigh. But soon after, turbid tears flowed uncontrollably from her eyes. As time passed, more and more tears flowed, and in the end, they completely covered the beautiful face of the Black Tortoise. These were tears of sorrow, tears of pain and despair as she watched her own mother die by her own hands. Damn it, this isn't your mother. She's just an illusion created by someone else. The Real King Arthur is a man. He can't be my mother. Heaven-span Black Tortoise seemed to hate his mother's tears, so he began to curse at himself. Forget it. Your mother is already dead. This contract is going to have its final binding effect. Your father is going to die soon, and you're going to die as well. I will recover my true self in your corpse. Heaven-span Black Tortoise roared excitedly as tears flowed down his face. This roar lasted for about 10 minutes. It was quite a long time, so long that Heaven-span Black Tortoise obediently shut his mouth. Chapter 1602. What's going on? Why aren't you dead yet? Why am I not dead yet? Tian looked at Gahan, who was still sitting quietly on the chair and staring blankly at the pool of black water in his arms. That's not right. The effect of the eternal brush should be triggered immediately. Once Mother dies, you and I will die immediately. Why are you still here? Why aren't you dead yet? Tian pointed at Gahan's nose and asked. However, Gahan didn't give Tian any answer and continued to stare blankly at the pool of black water in his arms. On the other side, Black Tortoise Tian quickly grabbed the crucial contract and was horrified to find that Artoria's name on the contract was quickly fading away. All the names related to Artoria were also quickly fading away. From this, it could be seen that Artoria was indeed dead. Otherwise, the words on the contract written by the everlasting brush would not disappear. Only after the person related to the words died would the words disappear completely. This also meant that the everlasting brush was indeed playing its role. But if that was the case, why wasn't Gahan dead? Why was he still alive? Tian Black Tortoise was about to go crazy. Everything had been so detailed and perfect. Gahan had clearly written his name under this familial attack. But why wasn't he dead? Why was he still alive? Could it be that his 1,000 years of hard work was going to vanish into thin air at this moment? You didn't sign this. You didn't sign it yourself this time, did you? After going crazy, Tian began to create his own answer to the question, and the first answer he created was naturally the most likely one. That was, the name on the contract wasn't signed by Gahan himself, but by someone else. That was why the contract didn't play its final role. I wrote it in front of you this time. Could someone else have signed it on my behalf? Facing this question, Gahan finally broke his silence. Instead, he raised his head and responded faintly. You can graft someone else's hand onto yours like you did before. That way, it won't count as your own handwriting. Perhaps because the memory of the last time he plotted against Gahan was too deep, Tian was successfully trained by Gahan to go astray. He began to doubt this dark, grafting method. What a joke. You and I are both sages. What in this world could deceive our eyes? You're not the seriously injured you from before. Can't you tell if this is my own hand or not? Or are you a fake sage? Gahan raised his right hand as if to let Tian take a closer look. In fact, Tian knew that Gahan definitely didn't use any grafting method this time. That was indeed Gohan's own hand, and the signature was written by Gohan himself. But in this way, the problem returned to the original track. What trick did Gohan use to finally deceive this contract and make it not take effect? Am I the eternal world brush? After racking his brains, Tong Tian began to suspect that the omniscient brush in his hand was fake. This guy had just confirmed that the omniscient brush was the real deal from the disappearance of Artoria's name, and that the contract was written by the omniscient brush in one stroke. The reason is actually very simple. That is, you got the most important thing wrong. Gohan finally got tired of watching Tong Tian's performance. He silently stood up from the chair and easily took the contract from Tong Tian's hand. After glancing at it indifferently, he casually threw the contract on the ground. What did I get wrong? I didn't do it. I've checked the logic of this contract countless times. There can't be any mistake in logic, Tong Tian said with great confidence. The key to the logic of this contract is that I am Gu Xuanwu's father and Artoria is Gu Xuanwu's mother. Only in this way can the logic of this contract be valid. Otherwise, this contract is just a piece of waste paper. Gohan said, "What's wrong with this logic? Are you not my father? You're not my biological father." Heavenly Black Tortoise's expression was like that of a classic primetime family drama. In such dramas, there would always be a child who was neither your father nor mine. And at this time, Gu Xuanwu had the same expression as the actors in the dramas. If this was really the case, then the part of Tong Tian's personality that belonged to Gu Xuanwu would probably collapse. No, you are my biological daughter. You will always be Daddy's most beloved daughter, and also Daddy's first daughter. Gohan gently stroked Tong Tian's head and said lovingly, "Although you will make mistakes and be taken away by bad people, you are indeed Daddy's biological daughter. Daddy will always be your father." Great. That was great. Daddy, I am your daughter. I will only be your daughter. Tong Tian threw himself into Gohan's arms and rubbed against Gohan's chest. At this moment, Gu Xuanwu's personality was clearly the dominant one in Tong Tian's mind. Wait a minute. If I'm your biological daughter, then Mom. Tong Tian Black Tortoise suddenly realized something and raised his head, looking at Gohan with a dumbfounded expression. Artoria is my wife, but she is indeed not your biological mother. Your biological mother is someone else. Gohan sighed. Tong Tian, who was suppressed by Gu Xuanwu's personality, almost died of anger. He had schemed for 1,000 years, but the beginning was a huge mistake. He really could not die in peace. Who is it? Who is my biological mother? Father, hurry up and tell me, who is my biological mother? Black Tortoise Tong Tian grabbed Gohan's collar and shook him hard. Although Tong Tian Black Tortoise was a combination of two personalities, he was still a person. Tong Tian Black Tortoise was also eager to know the truth of the matter and who his biological mother was. Come, Daddy will tell you secretly. Gohan hugged Tong Tian Black Tortoise in his arms and moved his mouth to her ear. At the same time, Tong Tian Black Tortoise revealed an expression of anticipation. Her entire body and mind were focused on her ear, and she couldn't wait to know who her biological mother was. Your biological mother is Yi Qingping. Gohan finally revealed the true identity of that person. Ah! Tong Tian screamed instinctively, his emotions surging to the extreme. Then 12 rays of light shot out from the dimensional space at the same time. 12 streaks of golden blood streaked across the sky. Tong Tian Black Tortoise stared in disbelief at the 12 swords that pierced through his limbs, internal organs, neck, and temples. Among them were 5 friends that he was very familiar with, and there were also newcomers that he was not familiar with. Father, why? Don't you love your daughter anymore? The Black Tortoise struggled to turn his head. As he asked, he allowed his golden blood to flow out and splatter all over Mount Huagua. Chapter 16:03. I love you. Don't worry, Dad will definitely save you. Looking at his daughter who was soaked in golden blood, or rather, Tong Tian Black Tortoise, Gohan said lovingly before reaching out to grab Tong Tian Black Tortoise's right hand. No, no. Heavenspan Black Tortoise seemed to understand what Guhan wanted to do. He immediately grabbed tightly with one hand, trying to avoid Guhan's hand. At the same time, she kept exerting her power, trying to open her dimensional space so that she could send the things in her hand back. However, what made Heavenspan Black Tortoise in disbelief was that no matter how hard he tried to open the dimensional gate, the dimension did not give him any response. It was as if he had lost control of the dimension. This was simply inconceivable for Heavenspan Black Tortoise. Back then, when Tongtian was sealed by the five sages, he used his last bit of strength to forcibly break the dimensional wall between countless subworlds and the main world and send those people from the subworlds into the main world. They became the chief culprit who had been scourging the main world for thousands of years. Yuenko. One could imagine Tongtian's mastery of dimensional power. For Tongtian, dimensional power was almost equivalent to his back garden. But now, no matter how hard he tried to communicate with the dimensional space, he couldn't open the dimensional gate. Sect leader Tongtian, you don't have to struggle anymore. I've been sitting on that cliff for 13 years. In fact, I only spent one day comprehending the Great Way and becoming a sage. I spent the rest of the time thinking about how to kill you, how to wipe you out of this world forever, so that I don't have to worry about you running away again. So, in these 13 years, I fused the 12 divine beings killing formation of Zhu Wu, the Zhou Tian star battle formation of the Heavenly Court, and your immortal slaying sword formation together to form the 12 immortal slaying sword maidens formation that was specially used to restrain you. Gohan said faintly, as long as my 12 sword maidens are in your body, you won't be able to defeat a famed swordsman, let alone communicate with dimensional power. Your power has been completely sealed by me. Gohan, you bastard, you actually sneak attacked me. You actually use feelings to deceive me. You bastard. You don't deserve to be my father. Let me go. Tongtian Black Tortoise shrieked. In her opinion, Gohan had despicably taken advantage of her desperate need to find out who her mother was, causing her to momentarily lose her guard and insert the 12 sword maidens into her body. If the two of them had really fought, there was no way Gohan would have been able to insert the 12 sword maidens into her body so easily and completely seal her power. I didn't ambush you. You reap what you sow. Gohan shook his head and said, if you hadn't used this contract to harm me, I wouldn't have told you about your mother at all. I would rather you never know the truth and continue living like this forever. In the end, you harmed yourself. You can't blame me for this. You, Tongtian Black Tortoise, spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood. You betrayed my mother. You actually gave my mother's flesh and blood to another woman to raise. You were a bastard from the beginning, a beast, a heartless person. You don't deserve to be my father. You don't deserve it. It's not up to you to decide whether I deserve it or not. I am your father. Gohan looked deeply at Tongtian Black Tortoise and suddenly repeated, don't worry, Black Tortoise child. Daddy will definitely save you. After saying that, Gohan did not hesitate and directly grabbed Tongtian Black Tortoise's right hand. Tongtian Black Tortoise began to struggle crazily. She tried her best to clench her fist and not let Gohan take away what was in her hand. However, how could Tongtian Black Tortoise, whose power had been sealed, resist Gohan's strength? No matter how tightly she clenched her fist, it was easily pried open by Gohan, revealing an ordinary-looking black pen inside. It was the Thousand Worlds pen that could determine everything with a single stroke. At this moment, Gohan easily held it in his hand. Child, take a look. With this pen, Daddy will definitely save you. Gohan held the Thousand Worlds pen in his hand and said deeply, no, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with this pen? You won't succeed. You won't succeed. Tongtian Black Tortoise screamed, I don't want to do anything. I just want to write a new contract. After Gohan finished speaking, he took out a piece of ordinary paper from his dimensional pocket and wrote the word contract on the top of the paper with the Eternal World brush. After he wrote the word, the Eternal World brush suddenly flashed with a golden light. This ordinary piece of paper seemed to be injected with boundless spiritual energy. It was no longer an ordinary piece of paper, but a piece of paper that no matter if it was burned or submerged in water, it would still be able to withstand it. Even if it was a disaster that destroyed the world, this piece of paper wouldn't be damaged at all. It would exist forever. Therefore, sect leader Tantian will die without a doubt. He will never exist. This was the first sentence Gahan wrote on the piece of paper. When Tantian Black Tortoise saw Gahan write this sentence, he immediately went crazy. He raised his fist and punched Gahan's head, completely ignoring the 12 sword maidens stuck in his body. Guhan did not resist at all, allowing the heavenly black tortoise's fist to land on his body. He was like a statue carved out of stone, without any resistance. But when Tantian Black Tortoise tried to move Gahan's hand to stop him from writing, he realized that Gahan's hand was also as hard as stone. He couldn't move it at all. Just like that, under Tantian Black Tortoise's obstruction like a madman, Gahan firmly wrote the next sentence. Everything that belongs to Artoria, come back to life immediately and live forever. After writing this sentence, Gahan took a deep look at the puddle of black water that was still quietly piled up on the ground. His eyes were filled with nostalgia. After all, this was the first woman Gahan loved in his life. Sword Maidens Qingpin, Sword Maidens Shishue, Sword Maidens Etian, Sword Maidens Duyu, Sword Maidens Shidian, Sword Maidens Juzi, Sword Maiden Slayer, Sword Maiden Celestial Exterminator, Sword Maidens Victorious Sword, Sword Maidens Slayer, Sword Maidens Xian Yuan, Sword Maidens Trapping. Be it as a man or as a sword, do as your heart desires. You will no longer be trapped by others. You will enjoy eternal freedom and will not be enslaved by others. After writing these two sentences, the 12 sword maidens that were stuck in Tantian Black Tortoise's body suddenly began to make sword cries. Although they were still in sword form, they also saw what Gahan wrote on the paper. But they didn't know that the cries of the sword maidens were not the cries of joy and excitement. Instead, they were cries of grief. Chapter 1604. All of the sword maidens are poor. Sword maidens passing water. Sword maidens leaning heaven. Sword maidens Doyu. Sword maidens starting point. Sword maidens orange. Sword maidens slaying immortal. Sword maidens ending immortal. Sword maidens victorious. Sword maidens slaying immortal. Sword maidens Xian Yuan. Sword maidens trapping immortal. Be it as a person or as a sword, they will follow their heart's wishes. They will no longer be trapped by others, and will enjoy eternal freedom. They will not be enslaved by others. Although this sentence was written in a semi-classical style, almost everyone in Huaxia could understand what was written in this sentence. If this sentence could really be fulfilled, then from now on, all of Gahan's sword maidens would no longer be bound by the sword bearers. They would no longer have to follow the sword bearers' orders and could live freely like real humans. This sentence was Gahan giving his sword maidens freedom. From now on, no one could become the sword bearers of these sword maidens. These sword maidens were him, and they would only live and fight for him. This sounded wonderful, but it also meant that Gahan would lose all of his sword maidens, and he would lose his identity as a sword bearer. From then on, he would return to being a normal human. Although Gahan might still have the realm of a sage, as a sword bearer, Gahan would definitely no longer exist. Perhaps he would even lose the realm of a sage. After all, no matter how high one's realm was, without the support of power, it would only be a castle in the air and would definitely collapse. However, these three sentences were not the end. Gahan continued to write a fourth sentence on the contract. Yuan Ko shall return to its origin, and humans shall return to harmony. From now on, destruction shall no longer exist, and Yuan Ko shall no longer exist, and peace shall last for all eternity. After writing the fourth sentence, Gahan finally let out a long sigh of relief. At the same time, he put down the Thousand Worlds brush and stared at the four sentences in a daze. This sentence was actually all of Gahan's hopes and the dream that Gahan had been pursuing his entire life. However, on the other side, after seeing the four conditions written by Gahan on the contract, Tantian Black Tortoise suddenly gave up on attacking Gahan. Instead, he laughed and scolded, "Ha ha! I thought Tantian Black Tortoise, was the greediest guy in the world. Now, it seems that you, Gahan, are the most shameless and greedy person in the world. Ha ha ha. So what if I'm greedy? Guhan calmly looked at the black tortoise and readily admitted, perhaps you're right. I'm indeed the greediest person in the world. However, if greed could be used on the right path, on justice, then what harm was there in being greedy? I have a clear conscience. What a good, I have no regrets. Tontion Black Tortoise spat out blood as he sneered. However, there's one thing you don't know. Although the Thousand Worlds brush can indeed fulfill everything in the world, it's not impossible to fulfill these four conditions of yours. However, the Thousand Worlds brush is also a greedy fellow. This contract will never make a losing deal. If you want to fulfill these four conditions, you must pay a price that surpasses these four conditions. Each of these four conditions of yours is earth-shattering and earth-shattering. In order to fulfill any of these four conditions, you must pay a huge price. I want to see what price you're willing to pay to fulfill this contract. Tontion Black Tortoise yelled. Of course I know that. I will pay a sufficient price. Gohan stared deeply at the contract in his hand, then wrote down the price of his comeback. I'm willing to pay the price of the Sage Realm. From now on, there will be no more sages in the world. Gohan will never be a sage. What? You're actually willing to give up your Sage Realm? You're a madman. Tontion Black Tortoise let out a scream that was even louder and more shocked than before when he saw Gohan write down the price. Sages were the peak of all cultivators. They were existences that everyone had to look up to. Since ancient times, countless people had paid the price for the word sage. Whether it was their conscience or their friends, as long as they could become a sage, even if they had to abandon their wives and children or sacrifice all living beings in the world, they would not hesitate. However, even after paying such a price, since ancient times, there had only been 8 sages, including the newly minted Sage Gahan. Even supreme figures like the Eastern Emperor Tai, the 12 Zhu Wu, and Fushi Xianming were forever stuck at this last step, unable to become a sage for the rest of their lives. It was this extremely revered position that countless people were willing to give up everything for. Yet, Guhan had easily written it down on the contract in exchange for his 4 conditions. At this moment, Heavenly Black Tortoise couldn't help but retract the word greed that he had just said. Using the word greedy to describe Gahan was indeed an insult to Gahan. Gahan did not deserve the word greedy. However, when he thought of this, Tontion Black Tortoise's heart immediately tightened, because the price that Guhan had paid was indeed huge. Even Tontion of the Black Tortoise wasn't sure if this kind of price could be exchanged for the 4 contracts. Guhan didn't have the final say in this, nor did Tontion of the Black Tortoise. Only the Thousand Worlds brush in Guhan's hands had the final say. At the same time, after writing down those conditions, Gahan let out a long sigh and was about to sign his name at the bottom right corner of the contract without any hesitation. As long as his name was signed, the contract would officially take effect. All the conditions in the contract would immediately be fulfilled, and the entire world would change drastically. As long as Gahan's name appeared on the contract, even Gahan's hands couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, even Guhan's hands couldn't help but tremble. However, he still pressed the world brush against the contract without any hesitation. Why can't I write anything? However, when Gahan was about to sign, the eternal world brush seemed to have run out of ink. No matter how hard Gahan tried, he couldn't even write a black. Ha ha ha. The conditions aren't enough. The conditions aren't enough. Your conditions aren't enough. The eternal world brush doesn't agree to this deal. Ha 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 ha. Your conditions aren't enough. The eternal world brush doesn't agree to this deal. Tontion Black Tortoise suddenly started screaming excitedly, singing and dancing as if it was the new year. This also revealed the reason why Gahan couldn't sign. From the eternal world brush's point of view, Gahan's conditions couldn't be compared to the 4 conditions that Gahan had written down. Therefore, Gahan couldn't sign his name on the contract. Looks like I can only increase the price. Gahan couldn't help but frown. The solution to this problem was very simple, and that was to increase the price that he had to pay. However, what made Gahan a little hesitant was that even the price of the Sage Realm wasn't enough to make a deal with the Eternal World Brush. So what else could he write down? Chapter 1605. Gahan wanted to increase the possibility of this contract being passed by increasing the price he had to pay. However, after thinking about it carefully, Gahan found that there was really nothing he could increase the price. It was not that Gahan could not increase the price, but there was no price that was similar to the Sage Realm or a price that was 1 or 2 levels lower. This was because compared to the Sage Realm, the other prices were far from enough. Even if this price was written down, it would probably not change the result. For example, a contract involving $1 billion could not be signed because the amount of the contract was not enough. At this time, if he only added $10,000 or $100,000 or even $10 million to the contract, it would not be able to promote the success of the contract, and it would not be noticed by the other party. At the very least, he would need to add about $100 million, and it might even move the other party. Now, the price of the Sage Realm that Gahan had to pay was $1 billion, but Gahan could not find a price that was equivalent to $100 million. Forget it. The future generations have their own blessings. I don't have to think so much for the future generations. In the end, Gahan still could not find a suitable price that he could pay. He could only give up on increasing the price to reach the contract and delete one of the conditions in the contract. What Gahan deleted was the 4th condition. Yuan Ko will return to its origin, and mankind will return to harmony. From then on, Yuan Ko will no longer exist, and peace will be eternal. This was originally a condition written by Gahan to let mankind return to the normal path of life before the Great Apocalypse. Now, Gahan could only delete this condition. In other words, in the future, Yuan Ko would still be active in this world, and there would still be endless disputes with the humans of this world. In order to achieve the goal of humans staying away from Yuan Ko, Gahan could only hope that the future generations could achieve this goal. When Gahan lost the Sage Realm and all the Sword Ladies, it was obviously impossible to achieve this great goal. No, no, no. Seeing Gahan remove the 4th condition from the contract, Black Tortoise Tong Tian unconsciously began to scream. Her heart was abnormally terrified. If the contract was fulfilled just like that, she would really have to leave this world forever. So she let out a scream of terror. But Gahan ignored her screams. Gahan took out another piece of paper and wrote the previous 3 conditions and the price he had to pay. Finally, he tried to sign for the 2nd time. Black Tortoise Tong Tian also stared at the pen in Gahan's hand with his eyes wide open, muttering silently, "I can't succeed. I can't succeed. I can't succeed." Perhaps it was because of the Black Tortoise's chant, but just like before, Gahan's Eternal World Brush was unable to sign the name. Evidently, the Everlasting World Brush felt that the price Gahan had paid was not enough to complete the contract. "Ha ha! Gahan, give up. I'm so powerful. You and I are both sages. If you want to kill a sage, you must pay the price of another sage's life. You actually want to pay the price of the Sage Realm in order to completely kill me. Stop dreaming. Unless you are willing to pay the price with your life, you can forget about achieving the 1st condition, not to mention the 2nd and 3rd conditions that are even more delusional." Seeing Gahan fail once again, Tong Tian Black Tortoise laughed maniacally. At the same time, he constantly ridiculed Gahan. "You're saying that if I want to kill you, I must pay the price of a sage's life?" Hearing Black Tortoise Tong Tian's words, Gahan asked indifferently, "Of course, but you should give up. There is no 3rd sage in this world apart from you and me. Don't even think about exchanging another sage's life for mine. Don't even think about it." Black Tortoise Tong Tian said with a smile, "Why do I need 3 sages? Isn't 2 enough?" Gahan said expressionlessly, "What do you mean by this? Are you joking? Could it be that you want to? Could it be that you?" Tong Tian was completely shocked. She had already understood the meaning behind Gahan's words. Gahan actually wanted to use his life to exchange for Tong Tian's life. Didn't Gahan know how precious life was? Moreover, it was not the life of an ordinary person. It was not the life of a lowly mortal. It was the life of a sage. Gahan actually wanted to exchange a sage's life for his own. This Gahan was really crazy. As a sage who had lived for tens of millions of years, Tong Tian was not tired of living. On the contrary, the more he lived, the more he wanted to live. He didn't want to leave this world at all. He wanted to live forever. But Gahan, who was obviously a supreme existence like him, didn't even want his own life. He was simply crazy. You're crazy, Black Tortoise Tong Tian said. I'm really crazy. Gahan nodded. Then, he took out the third piece of paper and rewrote the conditions according to the previous steps. He just wanted to exchange the condition of his sage realm for his own life. I, Gahan, am willing to no longer exist in this world. There will no longer be a Gahan in this world. Crazy? You're crazy. Even if you want to die, don't take me with you. Don't take me with you. Black Tortoise Tong Tian screamed again. Gahan signed his name again without hesitation. However, Gahan thought that he could exchange his life for Tong Tian's life. As a result, Gahan was disappointed again. Even if he used his life as the condition, Gahan still could not sign his name. His third attempt also failed. After seeing Gahan's failure, Black Tortoise Tong Tian learned his lesson this time. Although there was a secretly happy expression on his face, he no longer dared to ridicule Gahan. He obediently shut his mouth and did not say a word. This was to prevent Gahan from adding any more conditions that would kill him. What made Black Tortoise Tong Tian feel a little relieved was that after the third failure, Gahan did not try to add or subtract any more conditions. Instead, he sat quietly in front of the table and looked at the contract in his hand. Obviously, Gahan now did not know how to add more conditions. Gahan had already risked his life, but the contract was still not fulfilled. Gahan really did not know what conditions to add. Was there anything more precious than his life? Of course, it was not entirely impossible for Gahan to fulfill this contract. The biggest reason why Gahan failed the third time was that he could only exchange one life for another. The price he paid could only fulfill the first condition. It was impossible to fulfill the second and third conditions. If he deleted these two conditions in exchange for Tong Tian's life, it would be very easy to fulfill this condition. However, in this way, Artoria would still have to die, and his own sword mistress would become someone else's sword mistress in the future. This was a scene that Gahan did not want to see no matter what. None of these three conditions can be omitted, Gahan said in his heart. Chapter 1606. Gahan, why don't we make a deal? Seeing that Gahan was stuck in a stalemate, Tong Tian Black Tortoise took a deep breath and said, It's impossible to fulfill these three conditions with your life alone. Why don't you change the first condition so that you can fulfill your contract? How do I change it? Gahan asked faintly. How about you banish me for eternity? Tong Tian Black Tortoise gritted his teeth and said, Just like how I banished Kinzu in the past, you can banish me for eternity in a dimensional space, never to step into the origin world. This way, you can achieve your goal. I will no longer be able to cause any interference in the origin world, nor will I be able to do anything. This way, you can realize your dream without paying too much of a price. You can even save your life. You only need to pay the price of the Sage Realm. What do you think? This does sound like a good idea. Gahan nodded thoughtfully. Tong Tian Black Tortoise's face was also filled with joy. Finally, he could not die. But I refuse. In the next second, Tong Tian Black Tortoise fell into despair. Why? I'm already banishing myself. Why do you still refuse me? Tong Tian Black Tortoise shouted. I don't like you, can I? Gahan said faintly. Tong Tian Black Tortoise was so angry that he started to vomit blood again. Tong Tian Black Tortoise didn't even know how to refute such a reason. No, thank you for your reminder. I know how to change it. Gahan's next words made Tong Tian Black Tortoise's heart jump to his throat again. What new price did Gahan think of this time? What price does he have to pay? Heavenly Black Tortoise pondered curiously. She thought that Gahan had found a new price, but in the end, Gahan took out a new piece of paper. But this time, Gahan didn't write 3 conditions, but only 2. The condition that her sword mistress would be free forever was not written by Gahan again. So you gave up on one of the conditions. But don't even think about it. Unless you remove the second condition, this contract will not be valid. Tong Tian Black Tortoise knew that no matter what he did, Gahan would not let him go. He no longer put on an act and began to ridicule Yi Zichen again. Forget it, Heavenspan Black Tortoise had also thought it through. Since Gahan was willing to exchange his life for hers, then it was not a bad deal to exchange a life for a life. However, this Gahan would not be able to fulfill the other conditions. His beloved daughter would also die with him forever, and no one would be able to live. Gahan's sword mistress would also not be able to obtain eternal freedom. Just as Heavenspan Black Tortoise was shouting in his heart, Gahan began to write down the price he had to pay on the contract. But what made Heavenspan Black Tortoise's eyes widen was that Gahan did not stop after writing down the first price. Instead, he began to write down the second price. This guy really thought of a new price. Heavenspan Black Tortoise was shocked. His eyes were glued to the tip of Gahan's pen. He was curious to know what other price Gahan could think of that was comparable to his life. All of Sword Mistress Qingpin, Sword Mistress Shui, Sword Mistress Etienne, Sword Mistress Douyu, Sword Mistress Qidian, Sword Mistress Juzi, Sword Mistress Slayer, Sword Mistress Jiuxian, Sword Mistress Victory Sword, Sword Mistress Slayer, Sword Mistress Xianyuan, and Sword Mistress Trapping Immortal. I abandon them forever and sever my Sword Mistress form. I give up my body as a sword and will never be able to fight for humans again. Gahan wrote down the conditions on the price. But why did the price look so familiar? There's actually such a thing. Heavenspan Black Tortoise was completely stunned. This Gahan wasn't paying a new price. He was just adding the second condition that he had just deleted into the price. Although these 2 sentences were written in different words, if one were to carefully study the meaning, one would find that these 2 sentences were actually exactly the same. However, the former was Gahan's wish that his sword mistresses would never be enslaved by others and could obtain true freedom. The latter was Gahan's willingness to give up his sword mistresses forever. At the same time, he also gave up their sword forms so that they could never become sword mistresses of other humans. Damn it, it sounded like the former was about obtaining something and the latter was about giving up something, but in fact, it was the same. These sword mistresses would forever live as humans in the future, and they could also obtain eternal freedom. China's civilization was just that broad and profound. Just a few words changed the meaning completely. The benefits that he obtained suddenly became the price that he had to pay. This was simply too ingenious. You won't succeed. You're lying. You're lying to the world brush. You won't succeed. The world brush will definitely see through your deception. Heavenspan Black Tortoise screamed. Right now, he could only hope that the world brush had enough intelligence to see through Gahan's word games. Unfortunately, the world brush was only a rigid scale. When the weight was shifted from one end of the scale to the other, the scale's position couldn't be avoided. Therefore, this time, Gahan wasn't obstructed at all. He easily signed his name on the contract. The contract was established. Following the establishment of the contract, the first thing that changed was the puddle of black water on the ground. A light blue flower suddenly grew out of the puddle of black water, and it grew at an extremely fast speed. Soon, it grew bigger and bigger until it became a huge flower the size of a table. When a flower grew to its largest size, the entire flower uncontrollably bloomed. A naked girl curled up in the flower like a beautiful stamen, quietly sleeping there, as if waiting for the prince to kiss her awake. This was naturally Artoria, who had been reborn. At the same time, the 12 sword mistresses that were stabbed into Heavenspan Black Tortoise's body flew out of his body. They transformed into their respective sword mistresses in the air and landed on the ground. I can't go back. I really can't change back. Wah! Etienne burst into tears. She tried her best to transform back in her sword form, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't transform back into the Heavenspan sword. Sword mark. My sword mark is gone. I can't feel master anymore. Master. Master! Juzi suddenly threw herself into Gahan's arms in a panic. The sword mark that had existed in her body for an unknown amount of time had disappeared without a trace. She desperately threw herself into Gahan's arms, trying to feel Gahan's purple palace and Guhan's temperature. But at that moment, she realized that Guhan's body temperature was gradually disappearing. He seemed to have lost all his strength as he weakly fell to the ground, looking at her with hazy eyes. You, everyone, can I still look at you all? Guhan said weakly to all his sword mistresses. The 12 sword mistresses immediately surrounded Gahan. Qingpin lay in Guhan's arms, where the infant pouch was previously. Shui looked at Guhan quietly. There was no joy or sorrow in her eyes, but tears had already covered her entire face. Itian held onto Gahan's hand, unwilling to let go. Doyu had already cried so much that she didn't even look human. She kept shouting, Big brother, don't go, big brother. Qijian was silent. She couldn't even cry anymore. She looked like a dead person. On the other hand, Zhu Zi pressed her face against her frigid purple palace. She was still looking for the sword mark that belonged to her. Zhu Xian placed Guhan's head on his thigh. Zhu Xian, the sword mistress with the most fiery temper, had lost the courage to even look at Gahan. Lu Xian and Trapping Xian quietly tidied up Gahan's clothes. Victory Sword sat there in a daze. Xin Yuan kissed Gahan's lips without caring about anything else. She murmured, How can you die? I still have enough kisses. I still haven't practiced the Japanese 42 styles on you. How can you die? It's great to be able to meet all of you. I definitely won't forget all of you. I definitely won't. Guhan looked like he was looking at the sword maidens of all his true loves. Finally, he hugged the poor girl in his arms tightly, and the last trace of spiritual energy was completely severed. Father, your daughter is unfilial. Your daughter is unfilial. It is your daughter who harmed you. It is your daughter who harmed you. Father, please see your daughter one more time. I beg you, please see your daughter one more time. At the very end, it was Gu Xuanwu's sorrowful cries. Gahan, our main character, was dead. Chapter 16:07. Am I not dead? When Guhan slowly opened his eyes, he found himself surrounded by a foul stench. There was the stench of rotting fruits, the stench of cat feces and dog urine, and some other indescribable smells. In short, Guhan felt like he was in the middle of a garbage dump. In fact, after Gahan carefully observed his surroundings, he found that he was indeed in a garbage dump. He didn't know who threw him into the stinky garbage dump, and his body was covered with all kinds of stinky garbage. When Gahan climbed out of the garbage dump and walked to the street outside, the pedestrians around him avoided Gahan as if they had seen a ghost. Is this the era before the Great Apocalypse? Gahan only took a few glances at this world, and found that it was exactly the same as the world he saw in the illusion of the immortal extinguishing sword. There were tall buildings everywhere, and there were old cars flying everywhere. Guhan had indeed returned to the era before the Great Apocalypse. This time is when Guhan walked to the entrance of a supermarket. Through the electronic clock hanging on the supermarket, Gahan's pupils instantly constricted into a small dot. This was because at this moment, Gahan found that today was the day of the Great Apocalypse. According to historical records, in another hour, the Great Apocalypse would happen. Is this the real world? Or is this another illusion? Gahan pondered in his heart. At first, he thought that this was an illusion he saw after he died. However, Gahan soon found that his sage realm was still there. Although he didn't have the sword lady with him, he still had the power of a sage. He could transcend the vision of this world and observe the whole world. At the same time, this sage realm also clearly told Gahan that this was not an illusion at all, but a real world that existed. It was even the main world that Gahan was in before. At the same time, the city that Gahan was in was the city where everything began, which was Wuhan City. At this moment, Gahan was in Wuhan City. If this is Wuhan City, then the starting point should be here. Guhan's heart moved, and he directly opened the void gate. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the street. and most of the people around him turned a deaf ear to him. Only one or two curious children on the street saw this scene, and they pulled their parents' hands in surprise, saying that a beggar disappeared into thin air. Of course, their parents just smiled and comforted them, saying that their eyes were playing tricks on them. Finally, they bought some delicious food for their children. Thus, the strange story of a beggar disappearing into thin air completely disappeared from everyone's sight. At the same time, in the Hebei Province Museum's most important exhibition hall, the Bronze Hall, next to the display platform of the Yu King Gojin sword, under everyone's watchful eyes, a void door opened, and the stinky beggar Guhan directly turned into a void door and walked out. Ghost! There's a ghost! The surrounding tourists were shocked. The timid ones directly escaped from the exhibition hall, while the brave ones quietly hid behind some exhibition booths. They secretly stretched out a pair of eyes, wanting to see what this beggar who suddenly appeared was going to do. This is the starting point. This is my starting point. No, this is not my starting point. This is no longer my starting point. This is the king of you. Gahan originally wanted to say that this was his Chidian sword, but after thinking about it, he swallowed this sentence. This sword was not Gahan's Chidian sword, but the king of Yu's Gojin sword. Gahan had never owned this sword from beginning to end. Bang! Gahan directly punched the bulletproof glass that could resist bullets, directly smashing a big hole in the extremely hard glass. He reached out his hand and took out the king of Yu's Gojin sword from the hole. As expected, it's not my sword. Looking at the familiar and strange sword in his hand, Gohan let out a long sigh. At the beginning of his life as a swordsman, this sword was his goal. Unexpectedly, at the last moment, this sword was still not his sword. This was probably the interesting part of life. Where's the madman? Where's the madman? At this time, the museum's security rushed over. They held electric batons in their hands and carefully surrounded Gahan from all directions. They were ready to send this madman who attempted to steal the king of Yu's Gojin sword to the police station. Let me use your king of Yu's Gojin sword. Gahan cupped his fists at the security guards. Before the security guards could react, Gohan directly opened the void gate and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind the dumbfounded security guards. Previously, some tourists had reported that the madman walked out of the void gate, and the security guards had thought that the tourist had gone crazy. It was not until they saw this scene with their own eyes that they had to believe that this world really had superpowers. The next moment, Gohan's figure suddenly appeared in a dimensional space. At this time, in front of Gohan, an unprecedented battle that would decide the fate of the entire origin world was ongoing. The enemy that Gahan was most familiar with was surrounded by 4 men and 1 woman. There were also 4 extremely sharp swords helping the 4 men and 1 woman to attack together. However, the man who was surrounded resisted all the attacks by himself. Instead, he killed the people surrounding him and forced them to retreat. His strength was simply heaven-defying. This is sect leader Tong Tian. His opponents are Taishang Lao Jun, primeval lord of heaven, Saint Jain, Taoist Kundi, and goddess Nuwa. Gohan recognized the 6 people one by one. Gohan directly arrived at the battlefield that would decide the fate of the entire origin world. At this time, the battle was still at its most intense. The 5 sages were still launching fatal attacks against sect leader Tong Tian. With sect leader Tong Tian's defeat and death, the entire apocalypse era would begin. Gohan instinctively wanted to go and help. The reason why he wanted to take the Go Jian Sword King of Yu was actually to join the battle against sect leader Tong Tian. He wanted to use his own strength to prevent the apocalypse from happening and eliminate the tragedy of the apocalypse from the root. However, when Gohan was about to make a move, he suddenly stopped. Gohan was not afraid that he could not defeat sect leader Tong Tian. In fact, Gohan was very confident that with the help of the 5 sages, he would definitely be able to kill sect leader Tong Tian. However, what would happen after he killed sect leader Tong Tian? Would the great apocalypse not come? If the great calamity didn't come, wouldn't the sword ladies be born? And if the sword ladies weren't born, wouldn't his future poverty, and everything that he knew in the future be wiped out? Thinking of this, Gahan hesitated. He suddenly did not know whether he should make a move or not. He just watched the battle quietly while thinking about what decision he should make. The 6 sages, who were fighting at a white-hot level, did not know that there was a 7th sage watching from the side. They were already fighting so hard that their brains were almost fried. In their eyes, they only had one thing in mind: killing each other. They did not notice the existence of others at all. Just as Gahan had expected, the situation of the 5 sages was getting worse and worse. Sect leader Tong Tian was really too powerful. Goddess Nviwa, the weakest among the 5 sages, was already seriously injured. Sect leader Tong Tian also realized this and began to focus his attacks on Goddess Nviwa. Soon, Goddess Nviwa could not hold on any longer. In front of Gahan, she was completely killed by sect leader Tong Tian. With the death of Goddess Nviwa, the suppression of the 5 sages came to an end. Sect leader Tong Tian killed Taoist Kundi and honored Lord of the Origin one after another. Only 2 sages were left. Sect leader Tong Tian already had a hideous smile on his face, while Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist looked extremely desperate. Gahan finally understood. "How can I let you win?" Gahan gritted his teeth and said. Then he pulled out his King Gojian sword without hesitation and injected all the strength in his body into it. Under Gahan's great strength, the sword no longer existed and turned into a sword light that looked like a ray of light. "Go!" Gahan shot out the sword light. Sect leader Tong Tian was caught off guard and was pierced by the sword light. After looking at Gahan in disbelief, his body exploded into pieces. However, sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit was not injured. Instead, it quickly escaped from the explosion, ready to escape and find a place to resurrect and fight again. Don't even think about it. Gahan stretched out a hand from his hiding place and grabbed sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit, completely controlling it. At the same time, Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist also arrived beside Gahan and looked at Gahan vigilantly. They had no idea who this guy who suddenly appeared was, and when there was a 7th sage in the world. "Greetings, masters." Both Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist were nominal masters of Gahan, so when they appeared, Gahan bowed to them without hesitation. "When did we accept you as a disciple?" Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist asked curiously. "There is an agreement in the unseen world. Masters, you don't have to ask anymore." Gahan did not want to explain too much. He was not interested. He just placed sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit in front of Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist and asked, "Masters, do you have a way to destroy this primordial spirit?" "I'm afraid it's impossible." Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist shook their heads with a bitter smile. "Our bodies are greatly damaged, and our primordial spirits are almost in a state of collapse. I'm afraid the 2 of us are unable to destroy sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit. However, since you have been watching from the sidelines for so long and your strength is at its peak, if you are willing to sacrifice your cultivation, you can definitely destroy sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit. In this way, the world can be at peace forever. What do you think? Sacrifice my entire life's cultivation?" Gahan lowered his head and pondered. In fact, there was no need for Taishang Laojun and Jane Taoist to say anything. Gahan knew that he could completely destroy sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit as long as he was willing to use his strength. He no longer had to worry about the remaining fragments of sect leader Tong Tian's consciousness spreading to various places in the dimensional space and opening the dimensional wall between the dimensional space and the main world, causing the great apocalypse. Gahan did not care about his strength. He was willing to sacrifice his life to kill sect leader Tong Tian. It was not a big deal for Gahan to sacrifice his life again. However, if that was the case, history would be completely changed. There would be no more great apocalypse, no more sword lady, and no more people and stories that he was familiar with in the future. What should he do? "All right, I'll do it." After hesitating for a while, Gahan finally nodded. He then picked up the king of Gojian sword that had turned into light and slashed at sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit with all his strength. His primordial spirit let out a horrifying shriek, then exploded like a bomb. Sparks flew in all directions, leaving only a black crystal in Guhan's hand. It had lost all of its luster. Guhan's eyes widened, but he did not say anything. Instead, he looked at Guhan and said, "That's right." Oh no! The fragments of Grandmaster Tongtian's consciousness that exploded just now have already attached themselves to the dimension wall. That lunatic plans to take revenge on us. He plans to destroy the dimension wall and completely destroy the entire origin world. Taishang Laojun suddenly said in horror, "I'm sorry. I've just become a sage, and I can't control my strength yet. I've done something bad." Guhan said to Taishang Laojun and Taoist Jie Yin in shame. "No, it's not your fault. Even we can't completely destroy sect leader Tongtian's primordial spirit. You've done very well. Actually, these scattered fragments of consciousness are not a big deal. They're just a disease. The key is this black crystal. It's the source of sect leader Tongtian. If we don't destroy it, sect leader Tongtian will definitely be reborn." Taishang Laojun said worriedly. "All right, Taoist Taishang. Back then, it was our selfishness in the investiture of the gods' war that led to this evil result. My junior brother is already gone, and I no longer have any desire to live in this world. Let me sacrifice the last of my strength to seal this evil creature. All right, but I'm afraid your strength alone won't be enough. Moreover, someone needs to preside over the seal after it's formed. Count me in." Taishang Laojun nodded. The two of them had already decided to sacrifice themselves to seal sect leader Tongtian. In the end, they said to Guhan, "Little friend, although the two of us do not know where you came from, since you are willing to be our teacher, can you help us with a small matter?" "What favor?" Guhan asked. "Little friend, you might not know this. Once the dimensional wall opens, countless people from the outside world will definitely enter the main world. I'm afraid the main world will be destroyed, and those gods and Buddhas of mine have long been contaminated by sect leader Tongtian's consciousness fragments. Instead, they have become his helpers. However, when Heavenly Sovereign Fushi forged the Xinyuan sword, he said that someone injected pure and flawless consciousness fragments into more than 10,000 longswords that he forged. These long swords have gone through the baptism of countless years, and all of them have become full of spirituality. With just a little bit of transformation, they can transform into humans and fight against those who want to invade the other world. At the same time, they are also the last barrier that the main world can rely on. This is a transformation method researched by Heavenly Sovereign Fushi. This transformation method has already been used on the 4 immortal execution swords. The 4 immortal execution swords have indeed become human-like creatures. However, the spiritual power required by the 4 immortal execution swords is too strong. In order to transform the 4 immortal execution swords, Heavenly Sovereign Fushi has already exhausted all of his strength. He left with a smile on his face. Now, only you, who is in the sage realm, can enlighten those sword maidens one by one and let them borrow the power of humans to fight. This can be considered as making a final contribution to the human world. After Taishang Laojun finished speaking, he handed the transformation method researched by Heavenly Sovereign Fushi to Guhan. Then, he looked at Saint Jie Yin and smiled at each other. He took the black crystal in Guhan's hand, and his body became illusory at the same time. Finally, the three of them merged together and formed a black whirlpool. This whirlpool was like a mosquito coil. It spiraled together from the beginning to the end, becoming a never-ending passageway that could only go in circles. This was obviously the seamless corridor. "I'm sorry." Guhan looked at the seamless corridor formed by Taishang Laojun and Saint Jie Yin, who sacrificed themselves, and said in his heart. As for why Guhan said sorry, only Guhan himself knew. Has the apocalypse already begun? When Guhan once again returned to the main world, it was already a bloody world. Countless Yuan-Ko had killed their way out of the dimensional rift and carried out a cruel massacre on humans. These are all sins that I have committed. Guhan watched on helplessly as countless creatures died, but his heart was filled with guilt, but his footsteps became abnormally firm. He once again returned to the museum and found the glass cabinet that he had broken. Come back. Gohan clenched his hand in the void, and the Yu-King Gojian sword that had melted into light returned to Gohan's hand. Under Gohan's control, the Yu-King Gojian sword gradually changed from light to its original form. I'm sorry. I've used you too much. I'm afraid your spirituality will be greatly damaged. However, due to the overuse just now, the Yu-King Gojian sword's spirituality had been greatly damaged. In Gohan's opinion, the Yu-King Gojian sword would probably lose many of the memories that it had accumulated in its long life. Fine, this is your fate. Gohan suddenly recalled the Yu-King Gojian sword that he had encountered at the beginning, who had no combat power and did not know any sword techniques. He suddenly understood something and did not dwell on it. Under the control of Saint Gohan, the Yu-King's Gojian sword quickly returned to its original form. However, to everyone's surprise, other than the Yu-King's Gojian sword, there was also a fist-sized rock that appeared with the Yu-King's Gojian sword. This is the crystallization of my power. Gohan immediately understood the origin of this stone. Previously, Gohan had poured all his power into the Yu-King Gojian sword, but not all of it had been used up. Instead, a large portion had been gathered in the Yu-King Gojian sword's body. In the end, as the Yu-King Gojian sword returned to its original form, the excess power also appeared in the form of a crystallized stone. This looks exactly the same as the creation divine deity. Gohan looked at the crystallized stone formed from the power of a saint and smiled bitterly again. Then, he casually tossed this extremely precious stone into the distance. As for where he tossed it and whose hands it would end up in, Gohan could not care less. In any case, it would end up in his hands in the future. In the end, Gohan lightly tapped on the Yu-King Gojian sword that had returned to its original form. Following the method created by Fushi, he lit up the Yu-King Gojian sword's spirituality and truly opened up a new future for the Yu-King Gojian sword. Then, he placed it back into the glass case and even restored the broken glass case to its original form. Finally, he secretly hid in the void and waited quietly. 3 days later, a boy and a girl entered the museum, just as described in history, and found the Yu-King Gojian sword. Sigh, I wish you happiness, my children. Gohan did not show himself. He only looked at his daughter and said quietly. In the following time, Gohan traveled the entire world. He did not help anyone. He only had one goal, and that was to use his consciousness fragments to sense all the swords that could become sword maidens. This included the Sword of Victory, the Juzi sword, the Doyu sword, the Xinyuan sword, and so on. Gohan could not help but stop when he saw these swords, wanting to use them for his own sword maidens. But in the end, Gohan heartlessly left. When Gohan finished all this, he left the main world and began to build a peaceful small city in a dimension near the main world. He stayed in this small city and quietly watched the changes in the world. He watched as his son-in-law and daughter saved the world, and he also watched as his son-in-law and daughter turned against each other. In the end, he allowed his son-in-law to be exiled to another dimension and did not help at all. When a Jindi, who had fought for humanity for many years, was about to die, Gohan stretched out his hand and turned into a huge ray of light in the sky. He took the Jindi to his side and placed them in this small city so that they could break free from the restraints of time and live forever in this dimensional city. Every Jindi had such a fate. They had actually ascended to heaven, and the city that Gohan built was the legendary Immortal Realm. 200 years later, an awe-inspiring woman who was invincible in the world and had set up many backup plans for a young man in the future was on the verge of death. Only then did he make a move and take this woman, who had been powerful her entire life, to his side. Husband, Ching Er really saw you? Ching Er really met you in another world. Ching Er is really too happy. I Ching suddenly threw herself into Gohan's arms and wantonly cried in pain. All right, we will be together. We can be together forever. Gohan gently stroked I Ching's back and said. Hundreds of years passed. After that, Gahan did not interfere with anyone. He just let the whole world continue to change like this. It was only when Gahan's parents died that Gahan could not help but save their souls. When he turned 18 and was about to leave the city to fight, he took his parents back to his side, but he left his sister's soul behind. After a few decades, Gahan personally witnessed the destruction of the Seamless Corridor. He stepped into the Seamless Corridor. Only then did Gahan take out a stopwatch and silently count the time. When he reached the number in his heart, he disappeared from this small city with I Ching. He entered the Flower Fruit Mountain, just in time to see Gahan close his eyes. "Make way, I'm coming to save him." Seeing the countless sword maidens he had missed for 1,000 years surrounding him and crying, Gahan finally could not help but burst out with emotions. He walked out with tears streaming down his face, slowly but firmly pushing the sword maidens away. "Gahan, why are you here? This is..." The sword maidens were shocked by Gahan's appearance. They looked at the living Gahan, then at the dead Gahan on the ground. They did not know how to react. "Grandpa, your main body cannot stay here. If you delay for a few more seconds, your main body will really die." Flowing Maple suddenly appeared in the Flower Fruit Mountain and said to Gahan, "Understand." Gahan nodded. Then, according to his plan, he opened a door and sent the seemingly dead Gahan through the door. As long as he left this world, Gahan would be able to live. "All right, Mummy, this world is finally at peace. I'm going to bring you to find Daddy. He stayed in that world for 1,000 years, thinking about you every day. He missed you so much that he almost turned into a starship." Flowing time, Maple suddenly appeared by Gu Xuanwu's side and said something strange to Gu Xuanwu. He then looked at Gahan and asked, "Grandfather, you don't mind if I bring my mother to reunite with my father, right? 20 years. After 20 years, both your daddy and mummy must come back. I'm still waiting for my 80th birthday." Gahan laughed. "And a book that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.